Hi, Josh and Amanda. Thank you for agreeing to come talk to me for me to broadcast this conversation to my followers on Instagram or Twitter or TikTok or wherever people might be. I still try not to say X just because it sounds weird in my mouth, but I'm going to try to put this out everywhere. Um, just as a little bit of background, I just recently met Josh and Amanda, and they told me their story, and I was I remember driving home after meeting the two of you, and just having your story echo in my head. Um, you read the news stories about what is happening around the country in states where there are these very, very strict, draconian abortion bans coming into law, and it's kind of abstract. Even hearing about, the 10-year-old girl in Ohio who had to cross state lines in order to get an abortion after she was raped. Um, those stories, it seems like not real. It seems like that's something that's happening in some alternate reality, Handmaid's Tale version of America that isn't really the real world that is happening. It feels like, but there's got to be some explanation for that. But hearing your story and um, and meeting you in person, it resonated with me. And I was driving home, and I was just like, I started crying. I was like, oh my God, I cannot imagine anything more devastating than what you had to go through to so I'm maybe that's my introduction to you, and I would love if maybe we could just start by you sharing your story, what happened, if you're comfortable. And by the way, anything you don't want to talk about, don't talk about it. um Anything you want to edit out later, we can edit it out. But if you could just share what you're willing to share about your story, um I would I think it would be useful for people to hear.
Yeah. You
I
want to
might
start?
also just add one more thing before we start, which is this is a story about losing a pregnancy and having some very challenging health issues that brought you to Amanda, to the precipice of death yourself. And if that's too much for anybody to listen to, this is probably a good time to tune out. But it's a very compelling story and it has relevance to the rest of us. So if you're willing to listen to something hard, please do.
That's right.
Go ahead. You can take the opening part.
Okay. I appreciate the trigger warning for your listeners and your followers because it is pretty harrowing what happened to us. So it was 2022. We live in Texas, and there's a near total abortion ban in Texas. And we'd been trying to get pregnant for about a year and a half, and we finally were with some assistance from some fertility treatment. And after about 18 weeks, I suffered a complication that was going to cause us to inevitably lose the baby that we desperately wanted. So that news in and of itself was extremely traumatic and excruciatingly painful. But then on top of that, we were told by my doctor that she couldn't provide the health care that I needed, which in a standard situation would have been an abortion, because we were going to lose the baby. So I should have been able to, be induced and go into labor, but the baby's heart was still beating. So that would have been considered an illegal abortion. So
And
we,
maybe for everybody to kind of understand what was going on with Amanda's body, we don't often talk about pregnancy complications, but what happened, I think, should be fairly easy to understand when we kind of explain it. Amanda dilated prematurely, and within about 12 hours, her water broke. So at this point, she had no amniotic fluid left, which is vital for protecting both the mother um, and the fetus basically from each other, and keeps them both healthy and safe and infection free. And so what happens if you do not induce uh, and go through with an abortion without any amniotic fluid is it's very likely, it's just a matter of time, that one of the two parties will become infected, spread the infection to the other, and it's basically a catastrophic situation just waiting to happen.
Yeah, that's a good call out because I talk about this so often, and as the person who was pregnant, I understand the complications and all of that, but not everybody understands us. That's
Right.
a call out.
One other thing that people might not, some people, I'm sure almost everyone is aware, but you were at 18 weeks. So that is not a viable
Correct.
age for a fetus. Like there's no example in history of an 18-week-old fetus surviving. So that's why there's no viability at that point.
Yep.
Correct.
Yep. Exactly. So all that to say, this was a pregnancy that we desperately wanted, and at the end of the day, it was just not going to be viable. We were never going to bring home that healthy baby. So rather than getting an abortion and inducing labor, which is what should have been standard, I had to wait until I met the medical exception for an abortion in the state of Texas, which is that my life was at risk. So essentially, I was told that I had to wait until I was on death's door before my doctors could provide healthcare. And that's what happened. 3 days later, in a matter of about 10 minutes, I went into septic shock and nearly died before my doctor could finally provide healthcare. She stabilized me, delivered the baby, crashed into sepsis again, and was transferred to the ICU and spent about a week in the hospital.
Doesn't having your water break, having a totally non-viable fetus that all doctors know is going to lead to sepsis, doesn't that constitute your life in danger?
Nope, not in Texas, because the baby's heart was still beating. And so it's not the risk of my life being in danger. I had to literally be almost dead.
That's just so horrifying.
Yep.
And doctors I'm sure every OBGYN in Texas is appalled by this new legislation, but they're also under terrible threat to their lives and careers, right? If I'm not mistaken, Texas has a potential 99-year prison sentence or something like that for a doctor who performs an abortion that's determined outside of the parameters of when they're supposed to do it.
Correct. Lose your license, basically life in prison and a large fine. So the scare tactics are real.
So even your doctor in that instance, knowing that it's your health is at risk, the baby is not going to survive, they just can't afford to take the risk of going to prison for 99 years, and they have to wait until you're literally dying.
Yep.
And we've seen our Attorney General, Ken Paxton. He has personally sent letters. The Kate Cox case is a great example. He will actually write a threatening letter to a doctor and hospitals if he catches any wind that there may be some kind of abortion being performed. So this isn't some sort of like you said earlier, this isn't some made up invisible thing. We've actually are seeing this happen to real people, to real doctors in this state.
It's just horrifying. I've spent a lot of time, talking about political issues on social media and publicly for a long time. And abortion is one that I've often kind of steered away from because I know that reasonable people can disagree on this. Like when does a life begin? And these are all kind of lofty, almost philosophical questions that reasonable people can disagree on. But what is happening here is so transcending reasonable, where literally mothers who want to have a child, who are at probably one of the most emotionally painful crossroads of your life, I'm imagining. I mean, that must have been
The
after
most.
going through a year and a half of fertility treatment and trying to have a baby, and thinking about that was what made me tear up on the drive home. I was like, I can't imagine how painful that would be. But then to have the government come in and say, P.S., now you've got to come close to dying before we can do anything to help you, is draconian is not the right word. It's inhumane and vicious, and any reasonable person has to understand that that's just wrong. That's crossing a line that absolutely can't be. It's baffling to me that we found ourselves in this situation when Donald Trump was campaigning and said he's going to reverse Roe v. Wade. I think a lot of us thought I doubt it. Like, that's just sort of codified as part of the fabric of our legal system. But when he did, when he appointed these Supreme Court justices who did repeal Roe with the Dobbs decision, uh, I think we were still in a little bit of denial about just how bad it would get. And all of these things that almost feel science fiction, like Justice Clarence Thomas's decision on Roe v. Wade, where he said, we're coming for gay marriage and contraception next. Like the actual decision, the Dobbs decision, has embedded in it this ominous warning, like, we're not stopping here. If Donald Trump gets elected again, it's possible that he could appoint as many as 3 additional Supreme Court justices. And what is already stacked as this like very dark, almost medieval court, as far as I'm concerned, could get even worse. And that has to be a wake-up call for all of us. It's more apocalyptic a prospect than I think most people allow themselves to think.
Yeah.
So what else are you seeing in your conversations with people about this issue, and why are you engaging in these conversations publicly? Like, this is such a private, painful, horrible experience. Why are you engaging in these conversations publicly?
I think one of the things, at least from my perspective, Amanda's story is out there, and you can do a quick Google and you can get quite a bit of why she's doing what she's doing. One of the things that I'm really excited to be in this fight for is I want to help more men understand why this is such an important issue, why they should go vote for Joe Biden instead of Donald Trump, because of what's at stake, not just for women, but it's for everybody in this country. And that's something that it's not a top of mind issue for most men, but I want people to know that it actually will become top of mind whether you want it to or not.
Well, and I think, at the end of the day, these are basic human rights that are being stripped away from us. And as long as they are willing to limit the rights of women and pregnant people in this country, I don't know how anybody could feel like their rights and their freedom is safe under a Donald Trump administration.
And and we've sort of seen recently that the Supreme Court is happy to pick and choose who has the right to privacy. We're at a crossroads here.
Yeah. What you were a party to a Texas Supreme Court case recently that the court ruled on, I believe, unanimously just last week. Can you talk about what that case was and what the ruling was?
Yeah. So it was the day after we met you, Misha, the Supreme Court made that ruling or released that ruling. But at the core, it started with 5 plaintiffs in Texas, 5 women who were denied abortions for various reasons and suffered in one way or another. The case grew. Eventually, we had 22 plaintiffs. There could have been thousands on the lawsuit, though. The pain and struggling in this state and across the country with bans is just limitless. But it ended up with 22 on the suit. We testified at a hearing last summer. We were cross-examined by the state's defense team, which was absolutely cruelty I've never seen in my life.
What did they do in that cross-examination?
Well, for example, with me, they tried to force me to pinpoint the exact minute that the baby's heart stopped beating, the most traumatic period of my right. And for what? They tried to blame us for our pregnancies. They tried to get us to say it was our doctor's faults. They blamed some of us for being old and daring to get pregnant as geriatric people. I mean, it was just, it was unbelievable, truly, the cruelty. But we won that hearing. We got an injunction. The state immediately appealed, and it went to
And what was the ruling? The injunction was saying that the total ban was not legal, or what was the ruling?
The ruling and the injunction that was put in place would have allowed doctors in the state of Texas to provide abortions for medical reasons.
So had the state not appealed, Kate Cox never would have been in her position because she would have been able to get the abortion she needed. But because the state instantly appealed, the injunction was frozen, so it couldn't go into effect. So we were exactly right back where we started. So we went before the Supreme Court of Texas in December, and then it took them, 5 months, almost 6 months to release their decision. And what they unanimously said was that not a single one of the patients had standing. The only person who had standing was the doctor who was personally threatened by Ken Paxton. But none of us as patients had standing to even sue. And then in their decision, the part that's the most infuriating is that they only use a handful of our names. So most of the patients on that suit are just completely erased from their decision altogether.
And they have now let stand this draconian law that basically says you can't get any kind of care. You can't get abortions unless you're dying.
That's right.
Or unless
And
the fetus is already dead.
correct.
Yep.
And what we're seeing in the state is, you have the Texas Supreme Court who is willing to take no action. You have the Texas Medical Board who could provide guidelines. They are appointed by the governor, who obviously is a Republican. And they have every incentive to follow their party's wishes on this one. So they're not going to take any action. The Attorney General is Republican and they're not going to be taking any action. And so what you're seeing is these very draconian laws are now in place. And because the entire state is so conservative, there's nowhere for people to turn anymore. The Supreme Court even outlined all of the reasons why pregnant people in the state are not allowed to sue officials. They have sovereign immunity, and you can't sue anybody in Texas if you have a problem, is basically what they said. And so it's a really, should be a, absolute alarming situation when you understand it and realize that, Donald Trump gets in office. These folks now know the playbook on how to how to really take rights away from people.
Are there other things that you would like to share with folks about this issue? I mean, it's something that's impacting people, low-income people and people of color disproportionately. There are all of these laws coming up across the country that are giving no exception for rape, no exception for incest. Children are being forced to deliver children to deliver babies after being raped. And then, there's Alabama and them deciding that IVF is no longer acceptable because of these laws. And of course, many hardcore conservative Republicans who are now trying to come after contraception as well. And access to, I can't pronounce it, mifepristone. Mifepristone, which is, so far actually proved to be like the one remaining access point for a lot of Americans. My understanding is now the average distance to an abortion clinic has more than tripled since the Dobbs decision. So many providers have shut down across the country that on average, it's now 80 something miles to get to the nearest provider for an American, which means that there are so many poor people who that's an insurpassable barrier to a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And think
I'm sorry,
about,
I'm rambling. You
no,
know
that's
so much
okay.
more than I do
I was
about
gonna
this.
say that's a really interesting point. Think about those facilities too. They are not equipped to handle this influx of states and states full of people who are able to get there. I mean, they can barely handle the load that they have in their own state. Now they're taking on, 3, 4, 5, 6 neighboring states, and they simply don't have the resources to give care to people when they need it. It's really scary. It goes so much farther than people realize.
and take a person, let's just take where we live right now, Austin, Texas. You said the average was something like 80 miles, but that's certainly not someone in Austin, Texas. Your nearest state that still allows abortions is New Mexico.
Yeah.
That's like a 9-hour drive from Austin, Texas. So that's not viable for people
Yeah.
who don't have the means.
Yep.
So, or you might be in a situation like us where we couldn't we couldn't make the drive even if we wanted to or could afford to, because Amanda needed to be near a hospital because we knew that she was a ticking time bomb and sepsis would set in quite quickly so we couldn't even go if we wanted to. We had to stay near a hospital. So it's just a very complicated situation, and it's much worse on the ground than what people think.
Yeah.
And for the folks who live in blue states like California or New York, you're just one president away from there being a national abortion ban. And that may not be a ban that's passed by Congress, but it will be a ban that his administration will use everything at their disposal to prevent abortions in almost every way possible. So
Yeah.
it's very real. It's not hyperbole. And
Do you have a prescription for what people can do?
Yes, I do. Thank you for asking. I was gonna let you answer that, but I will. So I think, first and foremost, listen to our stories. Our legislators are trying to erase us, but we will not be erased. So listen to our stories, share our stories, amplify them. And I don't mean our stories. I mean everyone who is suffering, who's going through these things. Listen to us and help raise our voices. I would love to take the opportunity to plug the Center for Reproductive Rights, which is the organization that represented us in our lawsuit. I would encourage folks to get involved, whether they want to donate their time or their money. The center's a great place to do it. Your local abortion providers, if you're lucky to live somewhere where those exist, your abortion clinics. And then certainly politically, I would encourage folks to get involved as well, whether it's door knocking or, again, donating money. There's a lot of opportunity to get involved. And if all of that feels too scary, just have the conversation in your own community, have the conversation around the dinner table. And even though it's challenging, those are some of the most critical, important conversations.
well said.
I will echo what you said about politics. I think a second Trump administration, I don't think it's hyperbolic to say it's apocalyptic. It could be just such a dystopian future for us if he has a second term. He's figured out how to work the system now. He was a bumbling fool the first time, and still he managed to cause so much damage. But now that he has an apparatus behind him, I think he will be much more effective at stripping away rights. And everyone has to wake up to the reality that we have to do everything we can to prevent that from happening.
I think one contrast that feels very personal to us is, we've met President Biden, and we can tell you firsthand, he is one of the most empathetic people that I have ever met. He cares so deeply about this country and about the people that he represents, and that's every American. And the contrast to that is that Donald Trump cares about one person only. It's himself. We know that. We've seen that. And so we would just implore you to vote for someone who may not have the perfect track record that you're looking for. You may not agree with everything that he has done, but he cares so deeply, versus this person who just cares about himself. He does not care about you, and don't fall for his con.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I just want to thank you. I think what you're doing is incredibly brave and meaningful, and I'm sure so many people tell you that, but I could so well imagine, and I'm sure many people in your situation, the vast majority of people in your situation, just crawl into bed and console one another after such a painful experience. And you, I'm sure, have done a tremendous amount of consoling of one another, but the fact that you're actually taking taking your story out and trying to prevent this from happening to other people shows that you have good hearts as well. So thank you for doing that. I'm very appreciative. I feel lucky to have met you and heard your story. So
Well,
thank you.
thank you so much for saying that. And I mean, I think I can speak for both of us when I say thank you so much. I mean, I really admire when people in a position like the one that you have use your opportunity and your platform to look out for other people. I think it's really impressive, and I'm just really grateful for people like you, because this is how we tell these stories and this is how we get work done. And you don't have to do that. You know, you could just be ignoring all of this, and you do so much, not just on this cause, but so many causes. And just thank you from two little Texans. We really appreciate it.
Well, that's very sweet of you to say. I appreciate it. I'm coming to Austin in August. Maybe we could get together.
I
Let's
would
do it.
love that. Why are you coming in August? It's going to be 300 degrees.
We're doing a supernatural fan convention in Austin, and I think that they wanted the fans to experience what it's like to be in the gates of hell. So that's, I think, what's happening.
Okay.
Well, it'll be fun. Well, yeah, we'll be here. We'd love to see you.
Great. Let's make it happen. Thank
Okay.
you again so
Awesome.
much. Really
All right.
appreciate it.
Thank
Take
you
care.
so much,
Bye.
Misha. Bye-bye.